guys, welcome back to Mind and Seek. Thank you for joining me. Today we'll jump into the subject of change in the world through the power of perception. Perception is our interpretation of how we view the world through our senses, and it greatly impacts the quality of our existence. Because from a very young age, we've been wired with a great amount of conditioning, our perception can't help but be influenced by notions, regulations, assumptions that confine us. And although nature's circumstances are mostly out of our hands and out of reach, but as individuals and as a whole, we could take certain steps to make a more positive impact on the world. Recently, I was watching a documentary with a young girl who's a very well-known climate activist. Her serious demeanor, intellect, and attitude really impressed me. However, I couldn't help but notice that something was setting her back and she was having a hard time getting her point across. She was continuously complaining about how politicians and people in power were not listening to her and were not doing anything in regards to the climate crisis. In today's world, protests and demonstrations are at the forefront of change. And although most people would agree with these actions, I, on the other hand, have a slightly different perspective on this. When we see the world through the eyes of the masses and are jaded with conditioning and are filled with rage, resentment, and share similar notions and assumptions as they do, we are part of that very same problem. Wanting change but not changing our perception of the world does not work. It's like putting fire out with fire. We cannot add aggravation on what is already aggravated. Wouldn't it make more sense to put out fire with water to calm it down? Although this makes sense to most of us, it is hard to say why, as a society, we don't put in much effort to change the inside like we do the outside. We invest a great deal of energy and are not afraid to hold protests and demonstrations that potentially risk our lives. However, we are hesitant, afraid, and possibly lazy to look within and tweak our jaded sense of awareness. This subject itself is a long-winded, never-ending conversation. However, if we are focusing on this girl who wants to make positive change in the world, she herself has to go through a serious transformation. If you want to change the minds of politicians, there has to be something triggered internally that hits a nerve that goes beyond just demands and pointing the finger. As we know, 9 out of 10 times, pointing the finger only leads to more resistance, not change. And this is not to blame the crisis itself, but to blame the people who are not willing to change the crisis within themselves. It is much easier to blame the world for global and domestic problems, yet we never point the finger at ourselves. It is much harder to blame ourselves than it is to see the grime on the outside world. What happens to ships in water? Water pushes them along the way, and eventually they make it to their destination. In the same way, we have to approach ignorance and aggression with peace, grace, and patience. Over time, their tough exteriors will break and they will yield. This is inevitable because this is our nature at heart. We are meant to live in peace and harmony, not pollution and conflict. This disposition comes with patience and discipline. When we could seek the power within us to help change our perception of the world, that is when we are in a position to find resolution. If we could look beyond physical demonstrations and go to the heart of the problem, our internal source will reveal the true magic and power that could truly transform the world around us. And with that said, I'll wrap up tonight's subject. Thank you so much for joining me and can't wait to see you again soon.